What kind of English is that? Speak properly.
Of course. Je m'excuse pour la confusion. Hablo espagnol si préfière. Quan hua ya hui shuo.
What happens when a man who has everything tries to humiliate a woman who has nothing left to lose? Jaden Thorne, a billionaire, accustomed to the world bending to his will, thought he was just putting a lowly waitress in her place. He mocked her accent. He belittled her intelligence in front of his powerful associates. He expected her to crumble in shame. But he never imagined that this quiet, unassuming waitress Lucille was guarding a past more brilliant than his entire fortune, and that her response wouldn't just silence him, it would shatter his entire world. This isn't just a story about a comeback. It's a story about the hidden power we all carry inside. The air in Ethelgard was different. It wasn't just filtered, it was curated. It smelled of old money freesia and a faint, metallic tang of ambition. For the patrons, it was an oasis of tranquility in the heart of New York City. For Lucille Petrova, it was a gilded cage where she performed a nightly ballet of servitude for $8 an hour, plus the whims of the wealthy. Tonight the cage felt particularly small, her feet crammed into regulation. Black flats were a geography of old and new blisters. Her head throbbed with a dull, persistent ache, born from too little sleep and too much worry. Before her shift, she'd spent 2 hours on a crackling video call with the long-term care facility in upstate New York, watching her little sister Anya struggle to form words through the haze of medication. The doctors used sterile, compassionate terms like progressive neuromuscular disease and palliative care. Lucille just called it the monster that was stealing her sister piece by piece. Every perfectly folded napkin, every polished wine glass, every deferential nod at Ethelgard was a small coin dropped into the bottomless well of Anya's medical bills. That's why she was here. It wasn't a career. It was a penance, a necessary sacrifice. Table 7 needs more water, Petrova, and smile. You look like you're about to attend a funeral. The voice belonged to Marcel, the restaurant's manager, a man whose spine seemed to have been replaced by a ramrod of pure condescension. He glided across the plush carpet, his face a mask of pinched disapproval. "Yes, Marcel." "Of course," Lucille murmured, her voice carefully neutral. She forced the corners of her mouth upward. The smile felt like a foreign garment, ill-fitting and stiff. She grabbed a chilled pitcher, the condensation cold against her warm, tired hands, and made her way to table 7. The restaurant was a symphony of hushed conversations, the delicate clinking of silver on porcelain and the soft pop of a champagne cork. Lucille moved through it like a ghost her presence required, but her existence unacknowledged. She was an extension of the restaurant's decor, a functional object like a salt shaker or a bread basket. She refilled water glasses, cleared away phantom crumbs with her silver crummer, and answered questions about the pan-seared scallops with the practiced enthusiasm of a robot. She'd once been on the other side of this world, not in a restaurant, but in lecture halls at Columbia, dazzling professors with her thesis on the sociolinguistic evolution of post-Soviet states. She could debate Chomsky in English, argue Foucault in French, quote Pushkin in Russian, and discuss Goethe in German. Her mind was a fortress of knowledge, a palace of words. But palaces don't pay for experimental drug trials. So she'd locked the doors to that part of herself, pocketed the key, and learned to say, "Will that be sparkling or still?" At 8:15 p.m., the delicate chime above the heavy oak doors announced a new arrival. A palpable shift occurred in the room's atmosphere. The low hum of conversation faltered. Heads turned not with overt curiosity, but with the subtle, practiced nonchalance of the very rich recognizing one of their own, a bigger predator entering the savannah. Lucille felt it too, a prickle of unease on her skin. She glanced towards the entrance. He stood there, framed by the doorway, not like a guest, but like a conqueror, surveying his latest acquisition. This was Jayden Thorne. Even if you didn't know the name, you knew the type. His suit was a shade of charcoal, so dark it seemed to absorb the light, tailored with a precision that bespoke a cost equivalent to a new car. His hair was dark, flecked with a distinguished silver at the temples, and his face was all sharp angles and bored arrogance. He was the founder of Titan Digital, a man who had reshaped the digital landscape and amassed a fortune so vast it was spoken of in terms of the GDP of small countries. He was flanked by two other men. One was older, with a kind, wrinkled face, and a distinctively Japanese bearing his posture immaculate. The other was a sharp-featured Frenchman, his expression one of lively, intelligent interest. Marcel practically materialized at Thorne's side, his usual ramrod spine now bent into a sycophantic curve. "Mr. Thorne, what an honor. Your usual table is ready, of course." Thorne didn't even look at him. His gaze swept the room with an air of profound disinterest, as if cataloguing the various ways it failed to meet his standards. "See that it is, Marcel, and we'll need your best bottle of the Aero 5 Petrus. Don't send the sommelier, just have a waitress bring it." The dismissal was absolute. The sommelier, a proud Italian man named Lorenzo, was the soul of the restaurant's wine program. To wave him off was a calculated insult, a power play that declared, "Your expertise is irrelevant to me." Marcel's fawning smile didn't slip. "Of course, Mr. Thorne. Right away." He scurried off toward the cellar. Lucille watched the trio being seated at the best table in the house, a corner booth with a panoramic view of the city lights. It was unfortunately in her section. A knot of dread tightened in her stomach. She'd served difficult customers before, the demanding, the rude, the perpetually dissatisfied. But Jayden Thorne felt different. He didn't just seem difficult. He seemed cruel. It radiated from him, a cold aura of impatience and contempt for anyone he deemed beneath him. She took a deep breath, smoothing her apron. Just another table, she told herself. Just get through it. For Anya. As Marcel returned from the cellar, cradling the precious bottle of wine as if it were a newborn infant, he caught Lucille's eye. He gestured to her with a flick of his head. "Petrova, table 4, the Thorne party. Do not mess this up." Her heart sank. She pasted on the strained professional smile and walked towards the lion's den. The air grew colder with every step. The night was about to get much, much longer. Lucille approached the table, her movements fluid and practiced despite the tremor in her hands. "Good evening, gentlemen. My name is Lucille, and I will be your server tonight. May I begin by pouring your wine?" Jayden Thorne didn't look up from his phone, a sliver of black glass that seemed permanently attached to his hand. He simply grunted, an ambiguous sound of assent. The French guest, however, offered a warm smile. "Thank you, Lucille. That would be lovely." The Japanese man nodded in polite agreement. With painstaking care, Lucille performed the ritual. She presented the bottle, announced the vintage, and expertly uncorked it with a soft sigh. She poured a small amount for Thorne to taste. He waved a dismissive hand, still engrossed in his phone. "Just pour it." She complied, her movements economical and precise. As she filled the glasses, she could feel Thorne's irritation like a static charge in the air. He was a man who operated at light speed, and the analog human pace of a dinner service was clearly an agonizing ordeal for him. "Are you ready to order?" she began. "Or would you like a few more?" "We're ready," Thorne cut her off, finally placing his phone face down on the table. The action felt like a declaration of war. His eyes, the color of cold slate, settled on her for the first time. It was a look of appraisal, not of a person, but of an appliance. He was checking to see if she was functioning correctly. "My associates will have the tasting menu," he stated, not asked. "Mr. Dubois will have the wine pairing. Mr. Sato will have green tea, the finest sencha you have. Not that bitter dust you probably serve most people." "We have an excellent gyokuro from Uji, sir. It is very delicate and sweet," Lucille replied, her voice even. A flicker of something surprise annoyance crossed Thorne's face before it was replaced by his default mask of condescension. "Fine. And I will have the A5 Wagyu, medium rare. More rare than medium. If the chef sends it out even a hint over, I'll send it back. And I'll have a bottle of the Screaming Eagle Cabernet, the 12. An excellent choice, sir," Lucille said, making a note on her pad. "Just to confirm, that is the tasting menu for 2-1 with the wine pairing. A pot of our Uji Gyokuro, 1A5 Wagyu medium rare on the rare side, and the 2012 Screaming Eagle." "Did I stutter?" Thorne snapped. The Frenchman, Mr. Dubois, shifted uncomfortably. "Jayden, please. The young lady is just being thorough." Thorne shot him a look that could curdle milk. "Thoroughness is one thing, incompetence is another. In my world, if you have to repeat everything, you're not smart enough to get it the first time." The barb landed exactly as intended, a poisoned dart aimed at her confidence. Lucille felt a hot flush of anger creep up her neck, but she forced it down, burying it under layers of practiced subservience. She simply nodded. "My apologies, sir. I will put your order in immediately." She retreated to the kitchen, the safety of the swinging doors a brief reprieve. The heat from the stoves, the clatter of pans, the shouted orders. It was chaos, but it was an honest chaos, unlike the cold, calculated cruelty out in the dining room. She relayed the order to the chef, emphasizing Thorne's instructions about the steak with a weary sigh. The first part of the meal proceeded with a tense, fragile peace. Lucille moved like a phantom, anticipating needs, refilling glasses, and clearing plates with silent efficiency. She tried to make herself invisible to offer no purchase for Thorne's abrasive personality. The problem arose with the third course of the tasting menu. Mr. Dubois took a sip of the paired wine, and his eyes lit up. "Ah, magnificent. This is a perfect pairing." He turned to Lucille. "My compliments to the sommelier, and to you for your excellent service." "Thank you, sir." Lucille said, a genuine smile touching her lips for the first time that night. It was a mistake. The small moment of warmth drew Thorne's attention, like a shark to a drop of blood. "Don't encourage her," Thorne said, his voice dripping with disdain. He gestured at Lucille's name tag. "Lucille, that's Eastern European, isn't it?" Lucille froze. "Yes, sir. My family is from Russia." "I thought so," Thorne said with a smirk. "Your English is acceptable for this job. But you have an accent. A slight one, but it's there. It makes you sound hesitant, not confident." "I apologize if my accent is difficult to understand, sir," she said, her voice tight. "Oh, I can understand you." Thorne waved a dismissive hand. "It's just distracting. It's a sign of a limited background. You know, if you wanted to get anywhere in life, you'd work on that. Maybe spend less time daydreaming and more time on Duolingo." He chuckled a dry, humorless sound. "But then I suppose if you were that ambitious, you wouldn't be a waitress in the first place." The silence that followed was deafening. He had dismissed her entire existence. Something inside Lucille, something she had kept locked away for years, began to rattle its cage. She took a slow, deliberate breath. The smile on her face vanished, replaced by an expression of calm, icy composure. She turned her body, slightly directing her attention to the Frenchman. Her voice, when it came, was completely different. The slight hesitant accent was gone. In its place, she spoke in flawless Parisian French, her tone fluid and articulate with the confident cadence of a native speaker. "Mr. Dubois," she said in perfect French, "I apologize for Mr. Thorne's ignorance. It's evident his wealth has not been able to purchase class or politeness for him. I hope it does not spoil your meal." Mr. Dubois' eyes widened in astonishment. A slow smile spread across his face. He replied in his own native tongue, clearly delighted, saying that, on the contrary, the evening had just become much more interesting. Before Thorne, whose face was now a thunderous mask of confusion and rage, could process what was happening, Lucille turned to the Japanese guest. She bowed her head slightly, a gesture of pure formal respect. She began to speak in Japanese that was as crisp and precise as her French had been fluid. Addressing him respectfully, she said in his native tongue, "Mr. Sato, please forgive Mr. Thorne's rude behavior. It seems he is incapable of showing even a modicum of respect. I hope you are able to enjoy your meal." Mr. Sato, who had been silent and stoic all evening, looked up at her, his expression one of profound shock and then unmistakably deep respect. He gave a slight formal bow of his own from his seat, thanking her softly and telling her he was grateful for her consideration. 2 languages. 2 direct hits. Jaden Thorne's jaw was clenched so tightly a muscle jumped in his cheek. But Lucille wasn't finished. She straightened up and looked directly at him. Now she spoke in Russian, her mother tongue. Her voice was low, cold, and carried the weight of every sacrifice she had ever made. "Mr. Thorne," she said in chillingly perfect Russian, "you think your money gives you the right to humiliate people? You judge a book by its cover, but you don't even know how to read. Your arrogance is just a shield hiding an empty, pathetic man." Finally, she switched back to English. The transformation was breathtaking. Her English was now the English of an Ivy League academic, flawless, commanding, and utterly devastating. "And for the record, Mr. Thorne," she said, her voice ringing with clarity in the now silent dining room, "my limited background includes a master's degree in linguistics from Columbia University, with a specialization in polyglot cognitive function. The hesitation you detected in my speech wasn't a lack of proficiency. It was a conscious effort to appear non-threatening to customers like you, who so clearly mistake humility for stupidity." She placed her notepad gently on the table. "I will now have the kitchen cancel your screaming, Eagle. It would be a crime to waste such a noble wine on a palate as unrefined as yours." With that, she turned on her heel and walked away, leaving Jaden Thorne, the billionaire, who ruled the world from his phone, sitting in a pool of stunned, humiliated silence. The walk from table 4 to the kitchen doors felt like a mile. Lucille was aware of every eye in the restaurant on her back. The hushed symphony of the dining room had ceased entirely. The only sound was the soft tread of her own footsteps on the plush carpet. She didn't look back. She pushed through the swinging doors and leaned against the cool, stainless steel wall, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. The adrenaline coursing through her veins made her tremble. One part of her was terrified. She had just thrown away her job, the very lifeline that kept Anya's care afloat. The other part of her, the long-dormant scholar and fighter, felt a dizzying, exhilarating sense of liberation. For the first time in years, she had been herself. The kitchen doors burst open. It was Marcel, his face a mottled patchwork of crimson and white. "Petrova, my office now," he hissed, his voice a venomous whisper. She followed him into the shoebox-sized office, the scent of lemon cleaner and quiet desperation clinging to the air. "Are you insane?" he spat, whirling around to face her. "Do you have any idea who that was?" That was Jayden Thorne. He could buy this restaurant with the change in his pocket and turn it into a parking lot just for spite. You are fired. Fired. Get your things and get out of my sight. Lucille just stared at him, the fight draining out of her. The terror was winning now. What had she done? How could she have been so reckless? Anya's face swam in her vision. Marcel, She started, but the words wouldn't come. Before Marcel could continue his tirade, the office door opened again. It wasn't one of the kitchen staff. It was Mr. Dubois, the French guest. He closed the door gently behind him. Pardon the intrusion, he said, his eyes on Lucille. They were filled with a mixture of amusement and respect. He then turned his gaze to Marcel, and all the warmth vanished, replaced by an aristocratic chill. I would advise you to reconsider your decision, monsieur, Marcel stammered. Mr. Dubois, sir, I assure you this is an internal staff matter. Her behavior was inexcusable. Her behavior, Mr. Dubois interrupted coolly, was a masterclass in poise and intelligence. Your behavior, on the other hand, in failing to defend your staff from the boorishness of a client is what I find inexcusable. He reached into his jacket and produced a business card. I am Jean-Luc Dubois, senior partner at Dubois & Laurent. We happen to handle the legal affairs for the entire consortium that owns this building and, by extension, your lease. He let that statement hang in the air. Marcel's jaw went slack. His face paled. Dubois continued. Furthermore, my associate, Mr. Sato, was deeply impressed, as was I. Mademoiselle Petrova demonstrated more class and intellect than Mr. Thorne has in his entire portfolio. Firing her would be unwise. It would reflect poorly on the establishment. He turned back to Lucille. Mademoiselle, if you find yourself in need of employment, my firm is always looking for brilliant minds. Your French is impeccable. He placed the card on the corner of Marcel's desk, gave a slight nod to Lucille, and left the office as quietly as he had entered. Marcel stared at the card as if it were a bomb. He looked at Lucille, then at the card, then back at Lucille. The rage had evaporated from his face, replaced by a mixture of fear and confusion. He sank into his chair, speechless. Just then, the door opened a third time. This time it was Jayden Thorne. He stood in the doorway, his imposing frame filling the small space. His face was unreadable, the earlier rage banked and hidden behind a wall of cold control. He ignored Marcel completely. His slate-grey eyes were fixed on Lucille. Come with me, he said. It wasn't a request. Lucille's heart leaped into her throat. She looked at Marcel, who just waved a limp, defeated hand, gesturing for her to go. She followed Thorne out of the office, back through the now buzzing kitchen, and out the staff exit into the grimy back alley. The cool night air was a shock after the stuffy office. The alley smelled of garbage and rain. Thorne stood under the single flickering bulb of the security light, his expensive suit looking utterly incongruous against the backdrop of dented dumpsters and graffiti-stained brick. I don't know what game you're playing, he began, his voice low and intense, but it ends now. It wasn't a game, Lucille replied, finding her voice. It was steady now. It was a response. You were rude. Rude. He let out a short, sharp laugh, devoid of any humor. I run a $20 billion company. Rude is the least of my sins. Let's cut the crap. Who are you, really? No one with a Columbia Masters waits tables unless they're running from something, hiding something, or setting something up. My life is none of your business, she said, crossing her arms. He took a step closer. She could smell the expensive woody scent of his cologne. It was suffocating. It is now. I had my assistant run your name the moment you started speaking French. Lucille Petrova. Graduated summa cum laude. Thesis on linguistic encryption. Father Dr. Mikhail Petrova, a theoretical linguist and inventor. Lucille's blood ran cold. My Father Thorne's eyes narrowed, searching her face. Mikhail Petrova. He founded a small, long-defunct tech startup in the late 90s. It was called Petrova Innovations. Lucille felt like the ground had dropped out from under her. Petrova Innovations was her father's great dream and his great failure. He had poured everything into it, his money, his reputation, his health. He believed he had found a way to use linguistic patterns to create a new, unhackable form of data encryption. But he was a brilliant academic, not a businessman. The company had collapsed, leaving him broken and bankrupt. The stress, the doctors later said, had contributed to the massive stroke that took him from her and Anya years ago. "What do you want?" Lucille whispered, her voice barely audible. "For the last 6 months," Thorne said, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial level, "my company has been trying to acquire a portfolio of dormant patents from a holding company that bought up the assets of failed tech startups. Most of it is junk. But there's one set of patents that my top engineers can't crack. They say the documentation is deliberately obscure, written more like a linguistic puzzle than a technical manual. It's brilliant, but it's impenetrable. The patents are for a revolutionary encryption algorithm." He paused, letting the weight of his words sink in. They were filed by a man named Mikhail Petrova. Lucille stared at him, her mind racing. Her father's work, the source of all their family's pain and ruin. It was the reason she was here in this alley, in this uniform. And now the man who had just humiliated her was telling her it was valuable. "I didn't know who you were." Thorne continued, a note of something almost like frustration in his voice. "It was a coincidence, a 1 in a billion chance. I walk into a restaurant to close a deal with my partners. I get annoyed with a slow waitress, and she turns out to be the one person on the planet who might hold the key to a technology I'm willing to pay 9 figures to acquire." He looked at her, and for the first time she didn't see a billionaire looking at a waitress. She saw a man who had stumbled upon a locked treasure chest and was now face to face with the only person who knew the combination. "I don't want to apologize for what happened in there," he said bluntly. "It is what it is. But I do want to make you a proposition. I'm not offering you a job as a translator, Lucille. I'm offering you a seat at the table. Help me unlock your father's work. Name your price." The world tilted again. An hour ago, she was worried about making rent. She was being mocked for her accent. Now the most powerful man she had ever met was standing in a garbage-strewn alley, asking her to name her price. The key he was looking for wasn't just in the documents. She knew it was in the lullabies her father used to sing to her, in a mix of Russian and made-up languages, in the coded notes he'd leave in her lunchbox, in the very patterns of the linguistic fortress he had built around his mind. She was the key. And as she looked at Jaden Thorne, at his desperate, hungry eyes, she realized the power had shifted completely. She was no longer the servant. She was the gatekeeper. The alley which, moments before, had felt like the end of her world, was now the stage for its rebirth. The flickering security light cast long, dancing shadows, making it seem as if the world was holding its breath, waiting for her answer. Jaden Thorne's offer hung in the air, heavy with the scent of ozone and opportunity. "Name your price." The old Lucille, the tired, beaten-down waitress, would have been grateful. She would have stammered a number, a figure large enough to cover Anya's immediate needs, and prayed it wasn't too much. But the woman standing in the alley now was not that Lucille. The woman who had answered Jaden Thorne back in 4 languages had reawakened. She looked at the billionaire, the man who had tried to reduce her to nothing, and felt a cold, clear calm settle over her. Power wasn't about money. She'd seen how little that did for her father. Power was about leverage, and she was holding all of it. "My price," she repeated, her voice steady and devoid of emotion. "You can't afford my price, Mr. Thorne, not with money." A flicker of his old arrogance returned. "Try me. I can afford anything." "Can you," Lucille challenged, taking a step forward, closing the distance between them, "can you afford to restore a brilliant man's reputation? Can you afford to undo the years of suffering his family endured after the world called him a failure? Can you afford to give a 17-year-old girl back the years she's losing in a hospital bed? No. Your money is just paper. What I want is more substantial." Thorne was silent, his usual arsenal of blustering retorts and dismissive comments utterly useless. He was in uncharted territory. He was a deal-maker, a negotiator. He understood numbers, assets, liabilities. He did not understand this. "What do you want?" he finally asked, the words clipped. "First," Lucille said, holding up a single finger, "I want a formal apology. Not to me. To your associates, Mr. Dubois and Mr. Sato. You embarrassed them with your appalling lack of manners. You will apologize for your conduct and for creating an unprofessional environment." Thorne's jaw tightened. An apology was an admission of weakness, anathema to his entire being. "Second," she continued, her voice gaining strength, "you will not be hiring me. I am not your employee. If I agree to this, I will be a consultant, an independent contractor. I will require a preliminary consultation fee of $100,000 wired to an account I will provide simply for me to review the documents and assess the scope of the project. This is non-negotiable and non-refundable whether I decide to proceed or not." The figure was audacious, designed to shock. It was more than she had earned in 2 years at Ethelgard. Thorne didn't even blink. For him, it was a rounding error. The lack of reaction told her she was thinking too small. "Third," she pressed on, "I will not work in your sterile glass tower. I will work from a location of my choosing. All documents, digital and physical, related to Petrova Innovations will be delivered to me via a secure courier. I will have full unrestricted access, no redacted sections, no corporate babysitters watching over my shoulder. You want my help, you give me everything." She paused, letting her conditions sink in. She was dictating terms to Jaden Thorne. The absurdity of it was almost intoxicating. "And finally," she said, her voice softening slightly as she thought of Anya, "if and only if I decide that your intentions for my father's work are honorable and I agree to help you unlock it, we will then negotiate my real compensation. And it will not be a flat fee. It will be a percentage, a significant one, of the final valuation of the technology itself. I will be a partner, not a hired hand. My father's legacy will have my family's name on it." She finished her chest, rising and falling with the force of her conviction. She had laid her cards on the table. They were not the cards of a waitress, but of a queen. Thorne stared at her for a long, silent moment. The sounds of the city, a distant siren, the rumble of a subway car deep underground rushed into the silence. He was calculating, processing, re-evaluating. She could almost see the gears turning behind his cold eyes. He was assessing her not as an obstacle, but as an asset with a new, much higher valuation. "You're more like your father than you know," he said, an odd note of respect in his voice. He was a terrible businessman, but he was uncompromising about his vision. He ran a hand through his hair, a gesture of frustration that seemed utterly genuine. "The apology is difficult. The rest, the fee, the documents, the location, that can be arranged." "All of it, Mr. Thorne," Lucille said firmly. "Or there is no deal. You can spend another 6 months Another $6 million letting your engineers stare at pages they can't read. My father's work was a symphony of linguistics and code. Your people are tone deaf. Without me, all you have is sheet music. He let out a long, slow breath, a plume of white in the chilly air. Fine, he bit out. Fine, the apology too. He looked as if the word tasted like poison. Get me your account details. You'll have the money in the morning. A courier will be in touch regarding the documents. He reached into his jacket, but instead of a business card, he pulled out a sleek, expensive-looking pen and a small, leather-bound notebook. He tore out a page and handed it to her with the pen. My private cell number. Don't lose it. Don't share it. Send me the account information there. Lucille took the paper. His handwriting was sharp and angular like his face. She scribbled down the details for a new account she'd have to open first thing in the morning. I'll be waiting for your wire transfer, she said. She turned to walk back toward the staff entrance. Petrova, he called out. She stopped and looked over her shoulder. You're not going back in there, are you? He asked. It was a genuine question. Lucille looked at the door at the thought of Marcel's terrified face, of the cloying, money-scented air of the dining room. It felt like a lifetime ago. No, she said. I quit. She walked through the door, leaving Jaden Thorne alone in the alley, and for the first time in a very long time, she felt like she was walking, not towards a cage, but towards an open future. The next morning, she woke up not to the shrill alarm for her shift, but to a text message from her bank. The notification displayed a deposit of $100,000. It was real. Later that day, a black car with tinted windows pulled up outside her small walk-up apartment in Queens. A man in a sharp suit delivered 3 heavy locked briefcases. Inside were binders filled with documents, hard drives and notebooks, all bearing the faded logo of Petrova Innovations. As she spread the materials across her small living room floor, her father's presence filled the room. His familiar, elegant cursive, the complex diagrams that blended musical notation with mathematical formulae, it was all here. It was like hearing his voice again after years of silence. But as she delved deeper, she realized Thorne's engineers weren't just stymied, they were missing the point entirely. They saw it as a single encryption technology. Lucille, who had grown up inside her father's beautiful, complex mind, saw something far grander. It wasn't just a lock. It was a new language, a self-evolving linguistic model that could form the basis of a revolutionary artificial intelligence. Her father hadn't just created a way to protect information, he had created a new way for it to think. And Jaden Thorne had no idea. The consultation fee was in her account. She had the key to a technology worth not 9 figures, but potentially 10 or 11. The power had not just shifted, it had been a tectonic upheaval. And she was standing at the epicenter. The next move was hers. The 2 weeks that followed were a plunge into a world Lucille had thought was lost to her forever. Her small Queens apartment, once a mere refuge from the exhaustion of her life, transformed into the headquarters of a singular, obsessive mission. It became a sanctuary of memory, a laboratory of resurrection. The 3 locked briefcases from Thorne were not just filled with documents. They were reliquaries containing the last tangible pieces of her father's brilliant, misunderstood soul. She worked with a ferocious, tireless energy that bordered on mania. Sleep became a brief, necessary interruption. Food a tasteless fuel. The scent of brewing coffee and aging paper permanently perfumed the air. She spread the contents across her living room floor, creating a sprawling mosaic of her father's mind. There were his elegant, spidery, cursive notes in the margins of technical papers, complex mathematical formulae interwoven with snippets of poetry and diagrams that looked less like engineering schematics and more like celestial maps. It was his language, and she was its last native speaker. With every page she turned, every cryptic note she deciphered, she felt him there with her. She could almost hear his low, thoughtful voice explaining the beauty of a Fourier transform or the elegance of a Russian verb conjugation. This was not a sterile academic exercise. It was a conversation across the veil of time and death. She felt the echo of his excitement, the thrum of his genius, but also the deep, aching melancholy of his failure. She found a draft of a letter to an investor, full of soaring hope, tucked inside a binder, next to a sheaf of final demand notices. The juxtaposition was a physical blow, a stark reminder of how the world had crushed the dreamer to get at the dream. Her phone, sitting on the edge of the kitchen counter, would buzz periodically with texts from a number she had saved simply as Thorn. He was growing impatient. "Any progress to report?" one message read. "My team is standing by," said another. She would glance at the screen, a faint, bitter smile touching her lips, and silence it. Each ignored summons was a tiny reclamation of her own time, her own power. For years, her life had been dictated by the needs of others, by Anya's medical schedule, by Marcel's demanding shifts. Now, for the first time, a billionaire was waiting on her. She would not be rushed. In a quiet moment, she pulled out her own worn laptop and opened a video file. It was from the care facility taken that morning. Anya was in the facility's small garden, her face pale but her eyes bright. A nurse was holding a single brilliant red flower for her to see. Anya's hand, thin and frail, trembled as she reached out her fingers, just brushing the petals. She smiled, a real, genuine smile that lit up her whole face. Lucille's breath caught in her throat. This was the reason. This was the entire point. The abstract puzzle of her father's work and the crushing reality of her sister's life were two sides of the same coin. She closed the laptop. The image of Anya's smile burned into her mind and turned back to the papers with renewed, steel-edged resolve. By the end of the second week, she had it. The full picture emerged from the fog of forgotten research, not in pieces, but as a whole breathtaking vista. Jaden Thorne and his team of world-class engineers had seen a tree. Lucille, standing on the shoulders of her father's love, could see the entire forest. They thought they were chasing a better lock. Her father had designed a new kind of key, a key that could think. It wasn't an encryption algorithm. It was a proto-language for artificial intelligence, a self-evolving linguistic model that could understand not just command, but context, intent, and even beauty. She stared at her conclusion, written out on a fresh page of a legal pad, and a profound, bone-deep certainty settled over her. She knew what she had to do. Picking up her phone, she ignored Thorne's string of messages and sent a single clean text of her own. The Algonquin Hotel. Lobby bar. Tomorrow. 3 p.m. Lucille stood before the small mirror in her bedroom, adjusting the collar of a simple navy blue dress. It was the most expensive piece of clothing she had ever owned, purchased 2 days prior, with a fraction of Thorne's consultation fee. It was not a waitress's uniform. It was armor. She was not going to this meeting as a supplicant or even as a consultant. She was going as a founder, the inheritor of a kingdom. Still, a tremor of doubt ran through her. Could she do this? Could she, Lucille Petrova, who had spent years making herself small and invisible, now command a room that contained Jaden Thorne? She thought of her father's broken spirit and Anya's fragile smile, and the doubt solidified into resolve. Yes, she could. The lobby of the Algonquin was a world away from the grimy alley where she and Thorne had last spoken. The air was hushed, smelling of polished wood, old leather, and history. The ghosts of great writers and thinkers seemed to linger in the dimly lit corners. It was the perfect stage, a place where ideas held more currency than capital. She chose a small, discreet table, ordered a pot of tea, and waited. He arrived at precisely 3:00 p.m. He scanned the lobby with his usual air of impatient ownership, his eyes sweeping past her table before snapping back a flicker of surprise in their cold depths. He had been looking for the waitress. He found someone else entirely. As he approached, she saw the subtle recalculation in his posture. He wasn't walking toward an employee. He was approaching a counterpart. "Lucille," he said the single word neutral as he took the seat opposite her. "I was beginning to think you'd taken my money and fled to a country with no extradition treaty." His attempt at a joke fell flat in the heavy air. "The thought was tempting," Lucille replied, her voice smooth and even. She pushed a slim file folder across the table. "But my father's work is worth more than $100,000. You knew that. You just didn't know how much more." A waiter appeared. Thorne ordered a whiskey, his eyes never leaving the folder. When they were alone again, he leaned forward. "So what have you found? Can you unlock it?" "Unlock it?" Lucille allowed herself a small, wry smile. "Mr. Thorne, you've been trying to pick the lock on a cathedral door because you thought there was a small safe inside. You failed to realize the cathedral itself is the treasure." She gestured to the folder. "You think you're buying an encryption algorithm, a better way to secure data. Your team saw a clever cipher. They were wrong. My father wasn't just writing code. He was composing." Thorne opened the folder. Inside were 10 pages of her analysis, a clear, concise executive summary. He began to read. Lucille watched him, taking a slow sip of her tea. She saw the minute changes in his face as he processed the information. The initial skepticism in the set of his jaw gave way to a focused intensity. His eyes, usually scanning for weakness, were now wide with dawning comprehension as he read her phrases: sentient linguistic modeling, self-correcting semantic framework, predictive contextual AI. She saw his knuckles turn white as he gripped the pages. He wasn't just reading a report. He was witnessing the unveiling of a new world. When he reached the final page, her conservative valuation of the technology, a number with so many zeros, it looked like a caricature, he stopped. He read it twice, then a third time. He slowly lowered the pages and closed the folder, placing it on the table with a reverence he usually reserved for nothing. He stared at the folder, then raised his eyes to meet hers. The arrogance was gone. The condescension was gone. All that remained was raw, naked awe. "My God," he whispered the words catching in his throat. "He really did it." "Yes," Lucille said softly, the single word carrying the weight of her family's entire history. "He did, and the world broke him for it. This changes everything," Thorne said, his voice distant, his mind clearly racing through 1,000 new possibilities. "This isn't just a product, it's a new paradigm." He focused on her again, the deal-maker resurfacing. "The partnership, your terms, you wanted a percentage." "I did," Lucille said, her voice calm and firm. "But my terms have changed." His eyes narrowed slightly. "Changed how? A percentage isn't enough. I don't want a piece of your company, Mr. Thorne. I want to build a new one." She leaned forward, her own intensity matching his. "I propose a new independent venture, a joint company. We will call it Opus AI, in my father's honor. Titan Digital can be the primary investor, providing the infrastructure and capital you do so well. But I will be the chief executive officer. I will run the company. I will hire the team. I will guide the development based on my father's vision, ensuring it's used not just for profit, but for progress. He stared at her, utterly silent. She was asking for the keys to a kingdom he didn't even know existed an hour ago. You have a master's degree and 2 weeks of experience, he stated, testing her. And you have a team of the world's best engineers with millions in funding and 0 results. She countered instantly, her voice like flint. Don't mistake my academic credentials for my entire skill set. I am the only person on Earth who understands the core architecture of this system. You have the capital. I have the knowledge. It's the only partnership that makes sense. My father's genius, my expertise, your resources. Take away any one of those pillars, and the opus remains a forgotten dream in a locked briefcase. She took a breath, letting the force of her logic sink in. Then she played her final card, and her voice, for the first time, held a tremor of raw emotion. And there's one more condition. It is utterly non-negotiable. She looked him directly in the eye, letting him see the fierce, protective love that fueled her. Titan Digital's venture arm invests in biotechnology. You will use your network, your influence, and your capital to get my sister, Anya Petrova, into the most advanced clinical trial for spinal muscular atrophy in the world. I don't care if it's in Boston, Berlin, or Tokyo. I don't care what it costs. You will move mountains to give her the best chance at a life that medicine can offer. That Mr. Thorne is the real price of my father's legacy. The silence in the historic lobby felt absolute. The fate of a multi-billion-dollar technology and the fate of a teenage girl in a hospital bed were intertwined, resting on the decision of the man before her. He looked at her, at the fire in her eyes, at the unbreakable will behind them. He saw the scholar, the negotiator, the protector, and the daughter. He let out a long, slow breath, and a slow smile spread across his face, a genuine, tired, and deeply respectful smile. He extended his hand across the table. CEO Petrova, he said, his voice resonating with a new kind of energy. When do we start? 1 year later, the building was a masterpiece of glass and light, nestled in a valley cradled by the green hills of Northern California. The clean silver letters on the facade read, Opus AI. Inside, Lucille Petrova walked through the main R&D lab. The atmosphere was one of quiet, focused energy. Teams of brilliant minds murmured before glowing screens, the soft clatter of keyboards like a gentle rain. Lucille, dressed in a sharp blazer and dark jeans, moved with an easy, confident authority. She paused to speak with a young engineer, asking a perceptive question about a data model, offering a word of encouragement that made the young woman's face light up. She was not just a figurehead. She was the heart of the operation. She reached her corner office, a space with a floor-to-ceiling window offering a panoramic view of the valley. On her desk, her phone lit up with a notification. She tapped it open. It was a short video from Anya's physical therapist in Boston, her sister supported by a complex harness, but on her own 2 feet was taking a slow, deliberate step. She looked up at the camera, her breath ragged with effort, and gave a triumphant, radiant grin. A tear traced a path down Lucille's cheek as she whispered, "Good job, Anya. I'm so proud of you." The door opened, and Jaden Thorne walked in. He looked different. The year had stripped away his bored arrogance, replacing it with the keen, focused intensity of a man engaged in work that truly mattered. "The beta tests on the translation module are exceeding all projections," Lucille said, her voice thick with emotion as she quickly wiped her eye. "It's understanding idiomatic expressions in real time with 99.77% accuracy." Thorne came to stand beside her, looking out the window. "Mikhail would be proud," he said quietly. He glanced at her, then at the phone still lit up with Anya's face. "Very proud." He paused. "You did this, Lucille. You saw what none of us could. My father left the map." She replied, her gaze distant, as she looked out at the sprawling campus. "I just knew the language it was written in." They stood in a comfortable silence, a silence born of shared struggle and mutual respect. Two unlikely partners forged in the fire of a cruel remark in a gilded restaurant. He had tried to silence her voice, and in doing so had unleashed a power that had irrevocably altered both their destinies. Lucille thought back to the woman she had been, the exhausted waitress, counting her tips, her world circumscribed by fear and duty. And then she looked at the woman in the reflection of the glass, the CEO, the innovator, the sister who had moved mountains. She had learned that a person's true worth wasn't measured in dollars or titles, but in the resilience of their spirit and the depth of their knowledge. Her future, once a narrow, desperate path, was now as boundless as the new world her father had dreamed of, a world she was finally building. Lucille's incredible journey is a powerful reminder that you should never ever judge a book by its cover. The person you might dismiss today could be the one who holds the key to your future tomorrow. Her story teaches us that true strength isn't about being loud or aggressive. It's about knowing your worth even when the world tries to tell you that you're worthless. It's about resilience, intelligence, and the courage to speak your truth, no matter who is listening. Every single one of us has a hidden fortress of talent and potential inside. Sometimes it just takes a single moment of defiance to unlock it all. If this story inspired you or made you think, please show your support by hitting that like button. Share it with someone who needs to hear a story of empowerment, and don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more real-life dramas that will touch your soul and remind you of the extraordinary power of the human spirit. Thank you for watching.